So hello, good evening everyone to session number 8 on MEG 5 Literary Criticism and Theory. So as we get the day started with, today we are not going to speak or discuss about anything else except or apart from a man called Jacques Derrida. Or if you go by his spelling, you could pronounce him as Jacques Derrida. But then we know it's a French name, so we pronounce it as Jacques. So Jacques Derrida. And yeah, sometimes if you are an average or a below average learner, and if you struggle with the language in particular, and if you find deep philosophical thoughts to be incomprehensible, then you may end up saying Jacques Derrida. Okay, so yak and yak may sound resonant enough for you, but my sincere wish is to make Derrida appreciable to you, essentially interesting to you, and as much as I can, comprehensible to you. To speak about Derrida in maybe an hour and a half would be a crime, because Jacques Derrida is much beyond that. He is one of those landmark theoreticians of legendary stature who has, in one way or the other, changed the way we look at theory. Though he was a philosopher, and primarily his focus was on philosophical and linguistic thinking, as students of literature, we look at Derrida and we use his theories in psychology, linguistics, history, political science, and whatnot. So Derrida was one of the most influential people of the post-structural era. Yes, as I told you in my last class, Barthes, Foucault, and Derrida were all contemporaries, and they had in their own way paved way for a lot of radical changes. But despite that, we speak about Derrida of a higher stature because the way he has propounded his theories and the way he has brought the central concept of deconstruction, though it's not absolutely a baby of Derrida, the way he has made deconstruction a sensation is something that we would find interesting. If we understand the theory, that is. If we go by the terminology and if we go by the dry summary, then maybe we may feel perplexed and we may not be as fascinated by Derrida as someone else would be. But then otherwise, Derrida is someone that most of us would be able to appreciate amidst quite a lot of critics who are bare minimally biographical critics. So that's why this entire day is for Derrida. But then I would like to begin by saying that maybe, not because we started 15 minutes late, but even otherwise, even if had we started on time, there is no guarantee that we would finish Derrida. Derrida may end abruptly. I'm not sure, given the fact that we have only 2 more days, and I would like to touch at least feminism and post-colonialism, and if possible, a little bit of Marxism and new historicism and cultural studies. I'm not sure how much I can come back to Derrida on another day. So maybe next time, next season, next batch, maybe if I get time, we'll discuss them in detail. But for the time being, I'm not sure how far I will be able to complete Derrida's topic for today. But then I'll also tell you before we get started with, why is teaching Derrida problematic? As in the case of many other writers that we have discussed so far, Derrida is not a literary background person. He's a philosopher, and his works are based on his domain. And he did not really try to impress us or appeal to us in any manner. On top of it, he's a Frenchman. He spoke and wrote primarily in French, and it was translated into English by several people, including Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak, who is popular for her own work on Can the Subaltern Speak? So these are certain things that makes him further problematic, because Spivak also has a high vocabulary, a very complex vocabulary, and that complex vocabulary makes it even more difficult to follow Derrida because of Spivak's elitist language, culture, structure that she incorporates into writing. To add to that, the post-structural ethos that Derrida brings in of destabilization or instability against logocentrism or fixity of meanings Well, these are simplified words that I'm using for you. There are, jargons or terminologies associated to which I will come back later. So, fixity of meanings. So, these are things that Derrida was battling against. And because he was trying to destabilize an existing set of conventions, it becomes quite difficult for us to at least comprehend him in the first or second or third reading. Then you may ask me, Barth also did the same. Until Barth, there was biographical criticism. It's a new critics who partially halted it, and later Roland Barthes declared that the author is dead and the reader is born. So you may say Barth also did the same. So what is the difference? The difference is that Barth was not, in terms of his writing, of a scholastic kind. You can read Barth like you read any short fiction. You read O. Henry, or you read Edgar Allan Poe, or you read R.K. Narayan. Not as simple as R.K. Narayan though, but then you can read Barth in at least a couple of sittings. But Derrida is a pure academician, or a pure intellectual, if I could use a better word. He's a pure intellectual. He's a pure academic intellectual. So being that pure academic intellectual, his terminology and his vocabulary in particular is a powerful tool that Derrida employs. And because most of us, this is not a criticism, I'm not belittling any of your intellectual prospects or possibilities, but at least to a certain extent, given the fact that we are all distant learners, such heavy terminology may be not that comprehensible for us or digestible for us. We may find it slightly baffling or boring or confusing or misleading. Hence, to teach Derrida is double or triple the trouble. Because normally, what is the approach that we employ to teach somebody? We speak about what the summary is, which, mind you, is absolutely against the new critical Barthian and post-structural notions. We are not looking to locate meaning primarily, mind you. So I can't summarize Derrida enough. Yes, I can, but that won't be sufficient enough. I can't read Derrida because Derrida's vocabulary, as also the French inclusions that comes in, would be quite complex for your understanding. And then what matters the most is to discuss Derridian concepts. That is where the vigor is. The entire force or lifeblood of Derridian ethos is in his writing. So without unveiling the essence of Derridian cosmos, Sheena, would you mind muting yourselves, please? Yeah, thank you. So in unwinding that, it becomes quite a tedious task or effort. So we'll do that. We'll do all that today, and I'll try to make it as simple and attractive or appealing as possible. Regarding the terminology and the complexities, the moment you go back after the class to a summary or the study material or the blocks, it would be definitely problematic enough for you. So I'll try to keep it as simple as possible. But then I do believe that at some point, this may get monotonous or boring, or you may slightly feel cut away from the process that's happening. So please make sure you intervene as and when and where it is required. Let's say I am trying to explain some concept and it's all going above your head. You're not able to follow what it is. Feel free to interrupt, because unlike whatever we have learned in the last 7 sessions, Derrida is definitely a slightly hard nut to crack. And from the base that you are at, you may find him slightly demanding or challenging, if not boring. So feel free to interrupt, feel free to comment, or feel free to challenge or question, and we'll try to discuss as much as we can within the limitations of time and try to explore the Derridian world, the Derridian cosmology. And I'll try to keep it as simple as I can at some point of time. Okay, so let's get started with a very, 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 very brief video on Derrida, which may give you an idea of Derrida first of all. Because before reading Structure, Sign and Play and whatever you have for studies or whatever you don't have for study, what matters is you understand the sort of scholarly person, or as I told you, the scholarly intellectual that Jacques Derrida was for a generation. Even today, for that sake. He is a cult figure, if I could use a word. He's a cult figure. So as a cult stalwart literary theorist from the post-structural era. A proper understanding of Jacques Derrida would help in understanding his work. One more disclaimer before I play the video and get my class started. Today, because we have quite a lot of things to cover, which are complex in nature, we may probably not have that final Q&A session, which we have generally from 7:15 or 20 to 30. So that we may make it up tomorrow after my tomorrow's session. But for the time being today, we may not have that session. Okay, so on that note, let's get the day started. No songs because we started at 5:45. So pardon me for that. I had a couple of other small videos which I wanted you to look at, but then not now, maybe tomorrow or the day after if we start on time. For the time being, here we go. The man, the legend. If at all you disregard the entire stuff in your, all the blocks put together, this is a man who would make you crazy. If you love theory, this is one man you would look back at and say, I love theory because of Derrida. I can say that with confidence. So here comes Derrida, and we'll get started immediately after this.
A suburb of Algiers, in what was Jacques Derrida was one of the most famous, controversial, but also wise figures in recent French intellectual life. He invented a way of doing philosophy that he called deconstruction, which fundamentally altered our understanding of many academic fields, especially literary studies. Derrida was born in 1930 in El Biar, a suburb of Algiers, in what was then French colonial Algeria. His family were Jews, his father a salesman for a local wine firm. He was initially slow at school and harbored dreams of becoming a professional soccer player. In 1942, under new laws enacted by the collaborationist French Vichy regime, Derrida, like all other Jewish children, was forcibly excluded from his lycée and spent a lot of his time at home with his mother. He suffered greatly from the anti-Semitism of Algeria's majority Muslim population and was deeply marked by the experience of having been in an inferior position at the nexus of three different religions, Judaism, Christianity and Islam, all of which claimed to speak the truth, none of which knew how to treat the others with particular respect. In 1949, just turned 19, Derrida travelled to Paris to take up a place at the prestigious École Normale Supérieure. He was a brilliant student, but in an odd position, highly privileged in terms of education, but utterly at the margins in metropolitan France in his status as an Algerian Jew. Though Derrida was not an autobiographical writer, it's hard not to read his work as a highly abstract response to his first-hand knowledge of bigotry and exclusion. It was from the late 1960s onwards that Derrida began to develop the ideas that made his name. In time, he became a celebrity intellectual around Europe and America. He was hugely glamorous, a good-looking man with great taste in raincoats and haircuts. He had a rich, diverse, and complex love life. In 1980, he was arrested on a wholly false drug smuggling charge, but was supported by the French president and politicians from both left and right. He loved playing snooker and devoted most of his afternoons to the game, which he played with exemplary skill. He died in 2004 from pancreatic cancer at the age of 74. Derrida wrote 40 books, all of them abstruse and subtle, but his importance for us can be revealed by examining three initially odd-sounding terms he often used: deconstruction, aporia, and logocentrism. Behind the high-flown vocabulary lie some crucially important ideas. Deconstruction is the word most commonly associated with Derrida. He used it to describe the way he went about thinking, though when other people started using this term, he quite often felt they'd misunderstood what he meant by it. Essentially, deconstruction means dismantling our excessive loyalty to any idea, and learning to see the aspects of the truth that might lie buried in its opposite. It was in 1967 that Derrida published his first major book, Of Grammatology. Its overt topic is admittedly rather strange, even tedious. Derrida was convinced that Western philosophers since Socrates had systematically privileged speech, which was seen as authentic communication, over writing, which was regarded as a mere transcript of what people might say, a second-hand report lacking the interaction and truthfulness that comes with conversation. In itself, this hardly feels like an urgent issue, But the drama of Derrida's work came from the bigger idea he developed from this claim. His overarching ambition was to advance a vast, troubling proposition, that once we begin to examine it closely, almost all our thinking is riddled with a false, that is, unjustified and unhelpful, privileging of one thing over another. Speech is privileged over writing, reason over passion, men, at least for long periods, over women, words over pictures, sight over touch. Derrida's core point was that this privileging involves a failure to see the merits and value of the supposedly lesser part of the equation. Derrida was not so much making the nihilistic point that everything is worthless. He was stressing that the neglected counterparts in some of our key oppositions are worthy of love and attention. Over his 40 books, Derrida deconstructed a range of key binary terms: reason versus passion, masculinity versus femininity, profit versus generosity, high culture versus low culture. His hope was that we could learn to live more intelligently with some of the conflicts that lay beneath these terms, that we could come to see that both sides were onto something, that both were a bit wrong, that both needed each other, and that the tension between would by necessity always prove irrevocable. It might look as if Derrida was always using deconstruction to attack tradition and the free market and to promote a left-wing egalitarian agenda. But he was a great deal more subtle than this. For example, in his deconstruction of the idea of equality, Derrida proposed that the assertion that equality is always better than inequality, though this might be a modern liberal axiom, is in fact unstable and obscure. And he pointed out that some of the best human situations we know are obviously not examples of equality in action. Derrida, a devoted professor and father, wrote beautifully and at length about the relationship between pupils and teachers and children and parents. To deconstruct an idea is to show that it's confused and riddled with logical defects, and that we must keep its messiness constantly in mind. Derrida was criticizing our tendency to imagine that behind every problem lies somewhere a good and neat solution. We are for him creatures destined to live our lives without clear answers, and that the craving for them is at the root of our troubles. He wanted to cure us of our love of crude simplicity and to make us more comfortable with the permanently oscillating nature of wisdom. For instance, he argued that we might be rightly confused about the merits of capitalism and socialism, or the relationship between love and sex, but that we should never rush to conclusions around these topics. There are useful things to be said on both sides of these equations. To conclude that capitalism is either splendid or sinful, or that love and sex are either very closely linked or have nothing much to do with one another, is to avoid grappling with the fraught and kaleidoscopic nature of reality. Being confused and uncertain around such concepts isn't a sign of weakness or stupidity. It is, for Derrida, the central mark of maturity. Derrida's tactic was to glamorize this condition and to give it a positive ring, which is why he brought back into use a beautiful Greek word, aporia, meaning impasse or puzzlement. He was proposing aporia as a state we should feel proud to know and to visit on a regular basis. Confusion and doubt are not embarrassing dead ends in the Derridian worldview. They are simply evidence of the adulthood of the mind. One of Derrida's chief targets of criticism was a way of thinking that he called logocentrism, by which he understood an over-hasty, naive devotion to reason, logic, and clear definition, underpinned by a faith in language as the natural and best way to communicate. Derrida, who loved music and art, stressed that many of the most important things we feel can never be neatly expressed in words, spoken or written, as a logocentric tends to forget. An instance of logocentrism which particularly interested Derrida was the prestige of the idea of IQ, which measures primarily a person's ability to solve logical puzzles, but which largely ignores many other qualities of mind. For example, telling us very little about a person's capacity for friendship, for being a parent, for having fun, or managing their emotions. For Derrida, certain people might not be so brilliant at completing geometrical sequences, but that would tell us very little about their skill at making a success of a marriage, a business, a holiday, or a party, all of whose importance Derrida understood well. As an esteemed professor who lectured in the world's best universities, Derrida, who was also the snooker and football-loving Algerian Jew, was casting doubts on the entire foundations of the modern intellectual worldview. Like many important thinkers, Derrida can be cherished as a corrective to certain excessive attitudes. In his case, an overzealous devotion to reason and clear-cut answers. Derrida didn't want to remove all hierarchies. He knew it was right that kindness should be privileged over cruelty, wit over dullness, generosity over meanness. But he also understood how often we unwittingly dismiss things, people, and ideas when their opposites bask in what might be an arbitrary status. At his best, Derrida is a voice of modesty and patience, asking us to see what might be of value in those ideas we too easily overlook, and to get curious about why it might be nice to be always, even if only for a little while, on the other side of any debate.
All right, so that's some brief intro to Jacques Derrida and his basic concepts. We've not yet started with our portions, but then, yeah. Before we start, okay, no, I'll give a couple of references later. Okay, so let's get started. So talking about Jacques Derrida, you have in your blogs his essay, or rather his speech, Structure, Sign and Play, which he gave in 1964 at the Johns Hopkins University, along with Roland Barthes' Death of the Author and Hillis Miller's Critic as Host and M.H. Abraham's Deconstructive Age. So today, as we discuss Derrida, I told you about the complexities involved. So let me begin by simplifying Derrida. And that's how I'm going to complicate Derrida for you. Maybe in 10 to 15 minutes, I'll finish his entire propositions or postulations. So if you want to understand what Derrida says in that entire speech or in that entire essay, it takes 10 to 15 minutes. But that won't complete it. So what we'll do is, then we'll shift gears and we'll move on to the jargons, the terminology, the most difficult part, the technical words, and how Derrida enhances this conceptualization of deconstruction. So we'll do that. That may take a longer time. And that's when, as I told you, the slightly confusing, boring scenarios would crop up. Okay, so let's get started without much ado. Yeah, so there are three works by Derrida that you need to be aware of before we get started as well. One is Speech and Phenomena. The second one is Writing and Difference. And third one is Of Grammatology. You would have seen that in that video as well. So there are three books: Speech and Phenomena, Of Grammatology, and Writing and Difference. The three major works, along with the deconstructive speech, that you must be interested in. Yes, there are quite a lot of later works, but then because we have a lot to do it and we don't have so much of time to discuss that, maybe I would only refer later if we have time about the Spectres of Marx, which was published later. Okay, so he was highly inspired by a few people. One was Edmund Husserl, whose postulations on geometry was his first work at. It was a translation that Derrida initially attempted. He was also inspired by people like, or philosophers like Martin Heidegger and Friedrich Nietzsche. So Nietzsche and Heidegger and their philosophies could be seen that Derrida was highly influenced by, and he has kind of drawn heavily or extensively in his postulations on deconstruction. Michel Foucault, needless to say, was Derrida's teacher. Had pointed or hinted that during our previous class on Roland Barthes, if you remember that is. At this point of time, I also make some passive references. These references may come in handy later when you look at the concepts that we discussed today, and when you have to go back and draw analogies, comparisons. So there is this concept called heteroglossia. Heteroglossia, propounded by Mikhail Bakhtin. You may have heard of him somewhere or read of him in the blogs. So Mikhail Bakhtin comes up with this term called heteroglossia. So what is heteroglossia? He speaks about multiple voices within the text. Sometimes heteroglossia is asked for short note. So what is heteroglossia? Heteroglossia is multiple voices within the text. But despite bringing in heteroglossia as a concept, Bakhtin doesn't question the boundaries of a text or the authority of the author, which we see in Roland Barthes and Jacques Derrida. They talk about the boundaries of the text or limits of the text, and they look at how a text is self-referential or self-contained, whichever way you want to look at it. And they also question the authority or the authority of the author or the supremacy of the author. Okay. So what does Derrida say in Structure, Sign and Play? Basically, he is critical of logocentrism. We discussed in our last class when we began that essay on Barthes. We spoke about what logocentrism is and how a center is established and subsystems are established to create a hierarchical order of system. I gave you the example of, let's say, God, then you have religion, church, disciples, and so on. Or I gave you the example of manager, director, principal, vice principal, teachers, students, and how the structure system is ordered. Derrida, on contrary, speaks about the absence of the center, or he tries to destabilize the center. What we mean by deconstruction is, in a way, destabilization. An approach that tries to mitigate the possibilities of the existence of anything at the center. This is not the offspring of Derrida. Before Derrida, people like Sigmund Freud, for instance, had already done that. He also tries to destabilize what may be called as binary opposition. Okay, so we'll come to that a little while later. Let me just simplify his concepts. So basically what he says, just like we say in Waiting for Godot, nobody comes, nobody goes, nothing happens is the byline. Or in Roland Barthes, the author is dead and the birth of the reader is the byline. With Derrida, it is the absence of a center. Yeah, it is the absence of a center. It is the absence of the center which signifies, so according to Derrida, the absence of the center signifies the death of the author. In this first 5 to 10 minutes, when I say certain things, don't get too confused. Keep that in mind. We'll come back to that time and again in the next 1.5 hours. Because we'll be revisiting them at an extensive multiple layer. It's like learning a plus b the whole square. The first theory is always easy in maths. Second theory is comparatively okay. But you go to 3, 4, 5, you forget the first theory because it becomes all messed up. Deconstruction also goes in those lines. So these are the basic tenets that you need to remember. The absence of the center signifies the death of the author. The center is, paradoxically, within the structure and outside it. I repeat, the center that we are talking about is paradoxically within the structure and outside the structure. The center is at the center of the totality, and yet the center does not belong to the totality. Both confusing, enough. The center is at the center of totality, and yet since the center does not belong to the totality, it is not part of the totality. The totality has its center elsewhere. Center is not the center. Center is the desire for the center. The center is created or constructed. Okay, I'll move on from that a little while later. But I hope this much is quite confusing enough for you. During my offline classes, yeah, I understand, Shivangi. I understand how much I have confused you. For the Malayali audience out there, you may remember the scene from the movie Happy Husbands, where the 3 couple involved in a romantic melodrama ends up in a hotel, and the character played by Salim Kumar talks about, രണ്ട് ഭാര്യയ്ക്ക് 3 ഭർത്താവ്, ഒരു ഭാര്യയ്ക്ക് 2 ഭർത്താവ്. എൻ്റെ ചോദ്യം ഇതാണ്, ആരാണ് ഞാൻ? Yeah, somewhat that sort of a scenario. So Derrida speaks about center as its absence, center as a desire or craving for center as a non-existent fact within the structure. Because within the totality, the center is non-existent. I'll explain it to you in a much more simpler manner. During classes, what happens is I make it easier because we have a board. So here you have to imagine a blackboard or a whiteboard, whichever is convenient to you, and imagine a circle. Okay? Imagine that a max teacher draws a circle. So what does that circle have in the middle of it? Like you draw it using a protractor, okay? You draw a proper circle, 180-degree circle, sorry, 360-degree circle with a protractor. In the middle, what do you have? Yes, so what do you call that dot from a geometrical point of view?
So center.
Center, yeah, you call that a center, right? So Derrida says that that actually is not a center. That is a hypothetical convenient space that we address as a center because that is convenient to us. Maybe speaking about mathematics, I'm too poor at that, so don't argue with me with logic. I'm just giving a hypothetical example. Let's say we are drawing a 360-degree angle circle. Okay, so we assume that what is in the middle is a center. So then it becomes convenient to us. We say from this axis to that axis, this many degree is there, or this much length is there. So Derrida says that that is a convenient point of reference. Please listen carefully. That is a convenient point of reference. But that center is not a stable center. Now you fix the same compass at a different point and draw another circle, maybe within that center. I repeat without confusing you. This is a center. Sorry, this is a circle. You have a dot somewhere. Then maybe you draw a circle like this. Okay? I'm just giving an example, all right? So you draw a circle here. So now where is the center? The center is elsewhere. It is not the same center. So Derrida says that the center is paradoxically within the structure and outside it. The center is at the center of the totality, right? When you take the totality, it is at the center of the center. And yet, since the center does not belong to the totality, it is not part of the totality. The totality has its center elsewhere. Center is not the center. Center is the desire for the center, and thus center is created. Center is a hypothetical, convenient construct. I gave you the example of a geometrical circle just for the convenience. All right? Do not confuse it with a mathematical analogy. Here the focus is on a logocentric central definition. That center could be God. That center could be the head of an institution. That center could be a ruling leader. It could be anything. Yeah, okay. I don't know what the name is of somebody who said it went like a bouncer, but nonetheless, yes, that is it. The real center, is it not real? It is another. Or the center is, okay, Haley, all right, sorry. I couldn't read that font, that's some other language. Okay, so Haley, I understand, but then the more we go through it, I hope it will become clearer for you. So the center is not the center, but it is the desire for the center. Center is a construct, or any fixity of meaning is a construct. It is always in a flux. If I could use the word flux. Okay, so I told you be patient, give me some time. I'm trying to simplify this. Okay, yeah, good observation that the center doesn't hold. Yeah, spot on. So let me try to simplify. This is simplified version. तो यहाँ आप कंफ्यूज होना शुरू करेंगे तो कॉम्प्लेक्स होने में क्या होगा हाल? We are going to shift gears in another 5 to 10 minutes. So what's going to happen to you then? I'm going to come to the technical terms. Bricolage, play, sign signified, difference. तो क्या हाल होगा? हाल बेहाल था बेताल होगा ना, तो relax. So the point is, the simple thing is, center does not exist. Let's keep it very simple. There is no fixity. There is no center. Center is a hypothetical, convenient structural vantage point. Center is always in a flux. There is no center. There is no absolute middle. there is only a constructive, convenient middle or center, and that center is always in a flux, FLUX. And that center can be hypothetical. It is a desire for the center for a structure to hypothetically function. Now, let me take it one step ahead. We have been talking about center. So what comes to your mind on a Saussurean basis is a center of a circle, right? But then again, Derrida is critiquing logocentrism as well as phonocentrism. So here the focus is not on the center of a circle, but rather of anything that looks for centrality, logocentrality, as in religion, God, or permanence. In the case of this classroom, teacher, you are looking at me as a center. I am the person from whom the prakshepan is going. I'm like Akashwani. I'm doing this telecast, and you're listening to me, and you're trying to get stabilized as a convenient center. You're looking at me. So what happens if I am in a flux? What happens if I am replaced by somebody? What happens if I am non-existent? So Derrida says that it is still there. So even at the absence, there is a desire for center. Center is just a convenient structure. Okay, I'll come to that a little while later to problematize it or to complicate it. Let me get started with my expeditions. And yeah, before that, let me also bring in a few more simpler terminologies to you and then go back to Derrida and complicate him. Yes, Rati, that's exactly what Derrida is challenging. Okay, now listen to Rati's point that's there in the chat box. Center could be the point from there the source emanates or originates, right? That's a good word. That's what I was coming to. Originates, right? So the problem with origin is that as much as it anticipates, it precipitates as well. The moment you speak about beginning, right? On a stereotypical sense, when you speak about beginning, it would always have what?
And
Yeah. So the moment you speak about a beginning, you are also anticipating an end. So this concept, again, let me tell you, our focus is literary. Derrida's is philosophical. It could also be applied to political. It could also be applied to psychological. So I'm giving you literary examples because our primary focus is literary analysis. You go to block 7, you would find the last 2 modules where a deconstructive analysis has been done. So that is one thing that you could go back and look at. I'm not dealing with that for the time being. But I'm giving you the live example because, literary examples because this could give you a better idea. So look at the pre-Saussurean literary theoreticians. We have already seen the arguments of Saussure and Barthes and new critics in the last 2 classes. What was their argument? Before these people, what existed was historical biographical criticism, right? So what happens there? So they are looking for a beginning point. Let's say William Wordsworth was born in the year dash at this particular place. So that is a starting point. And maybe the end point would be the time when he wrote a masterpiece. Let's say Lyrical Ballads was published in the year 1798 and it kickstarted the Romantic movement in literature. Or it could be the death of Wordsworth. So any beginning anticipates an end. This is another postulation that Derrida brings forth. So this is where you should be careful about the terminological part. So what is the terminological part? We have used 2 simplified words here. That's why I told in my first class, most of the jargons have simplified versions. But we use jargons to show that, or just like we said, dikave ke liye. We're just using jargons for show off. So we speak about beginning and end. Okay. Now let me speak about different disciplines or domains. When you study about the beginnings, yes, it's part of history. It's a sub-branch of history. What is that branch called? The study of inception, the study of beginnings, the study of evolution of world, the study of the Big Bang.
anthropology.
No. I'm not talking about anthropology. Anthropology is human-centric. I'm talking about the other one, the study of beginnings. The thing is, we know the domain, but we don't realize that the word, half word in that is actually what means beginning. There is this domain or discipline called
Etymology.
no, etymology is related to word, Navya Devi. That's a good observation. But etymology is related to word formation. Okay, it's not related.
Genesis.
So, yeah, no, not evolution. We are talking about another branch called archaeology, right? Archaeology. So, what is archaeology? Look at the first part of that word, archae, A-R-C-H-E. Archae means beginning. So, what is the study of the end of everything? Yeah, there is this branch called teleology. It comes from the word telos. Telos means the end. So it's between archae and telos. I hope I'm making it simpler now. Okay, archaeology, archae, archaeology, telos, teleology. So the reader talks about how we conceptualize the center. That's why it becomes problematic. Center becomes the desire for the center. Or center becomes a hypothetical vantage point. Center becomes a complicated. Center becomes a non-existent hypothetical point. Okay, so that's because we conceptualize the center as origin or end. Or to put in other words, we conceptualize the center as archae or telos. Right? Either it is from the center that the entire structure has begun, or the entire structure is an end within the structure. The center acts as a base or a foundation to it. So the reader says that the problematization begins here. No structure is rigid and coherent in itself. Especially when we take it to literature, the moment we take it to language and meaning formation, in contrast to what Saussure said, the moment we look at words and how they generate meanings, there is no fixity whatsoever. So you cannot look at it and say there is a center to it. There cannot be a fixity to meanings. There cannot be a centrality to language. It is always in the flux. It is always in an interplay, a term I shall come back to a little while later. So it is always in a conversation. It is always in a shift. It is always in a transition. And one thing that means one thing at a point of time can mean the entire opposite a few years later. So that's something that we need to always keep in mind. So the reader goes on to say is that in the absence of a center of origin, everything becomes a discourse. So what is a discourse, you may ask? Again, it's a terminological, pedagogical jargon term. I'll try to simplify it for you. A discourse is a system in which the central signified, the original teleological, archaeological or transcendental signified is never absolutely present outside a system of differences. Hogyana or confusion? Let me repeat that for you again. A discourse is a system in which the central signified, I hope you remember what a signified is from Joshua, right? So a central signified, the original or transcendental signified, is never absolutely present outside a system of differences. अरे यार ये सब लिखता चलूंगा ना 2 दिन भी काफी कम पड़ जाएंगे. फिर भी I'll give this definition because this is central. A discourse is a system in which the central signified, the original or transcendental signified is never absolutely present outside a system of differences. Be confused enough for the time being. We'll go to the explanation just in a short while. Don't worry. So this is all that the reader has said. We'll take another 1 hour to go through all this in complex using the terms interplay, bricolage, signifiers, and difference, and so on. But then this is the crux of it. Then there are, like I told you, Heidegger speaks about heteroglossia, and he speaks about how meaning varies within the context. Similarly, Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche, I already told you, was one of the theoreticians who influenced Derrida. So Nietzsche substituted the ideals of being and truth with the concepts of play, interpretation, and sign. Being and truth, which was essential in the Enlightenment era, if you remember, he substituted it with the concepts of play, interpretation, and sign. We can see that Saussure takes sign to a different level, and then we can see that Barthes looks at it from a mythological analysis, and then we have Derrida who takes it into an entirely opposite perspective. We spoke about Sir Sigmund Freud in the initial part when we began today as an influencer. So Freud critiques of self-presence, of the subject of self-identity, and of self-proximity or self-possession. This again was a decentering phenomenon. I can't go detailed into Freud for the time being because we are discussing Derrida. But if you go back to your blocks, you would find this decentering phenomena in Freud as well. Again, talking about Martin Heidegger, another philosopher, existential philosopher to be more precise, he speaks about destruction of metaphysics, of ontotheology, of the determination of being that we mentioned a little while earlier, as presence, what he calls as Dasein. Again, that's for you to Google. I'm not going to go detailed because we only have another 58 minutes from this point of time. So they say that it is impossible to escape the metaphysical system without abandoning the Saussurean concept of the sign altogether. Because Saussure speaks about sign in an entirely different way from the post-structural ethos. He speaks about the arbitrariness of the sign. And he speaks about the interlinkages between the sign signifier and signified, and how they are referential. So without rejecting the metaphysical system, without rejecting the Saussurean tenets of sign, signifier, and signified, it is impossible to escape the metaphysical system. So the three key terms that flow from deconstruction of the structure of discourse from Derrida are bricolage, play, and supplementary. In simple terms, I'll come back to that a little while later in a detailed manner, but in simple terms, bricolage is a technique that uses the means at hand. Generally in Malayalam we say tumba, right? So whatever tool you have in hand and you use that, that's called bricolage. Bricolage is permitted by play. When it comes to language, the play is simply interplay between the words informing meanings. Right? One word in terms of the other helps in generating a proper meaning because one word is different from the other. It is this difference within the structure that creates meaning within that linguistic base. Derrida speaks about this from a different philosophical vantage point, but as students of literature, we are focused on the linguistic aspect. And they go on to say that language excludes the totalization that Saussure vouches for. This is a summary. This is a summary that I wanted to not confuse you with. And pardon me if in case I'm not going to bore you too much, or I don't intend to bore you too much. But the reason why I'm engaging in a reading for the time being is that is the best way to proceed further as far as structure, sign, and play is concerned. So I'll read, I'll explain, and I'll try to sum it up for you. Of course, 5 to 10 minutes later, when and wherever you find confusions, please put your hands up or put it in the chat box. Feel free to intervene. Yes, those interventions would delay our completion. It would maybe leave the text incomplete. By 7:30, we may not complete, but then those interventions are absolutely entertained and necessary. Because as I told you, this is a very complex chapter. And if you are not able to follow, not now, but let's say 30 minutes later, then that's a problem. This 15-20 minutes, that's okay. Because I was trying to sum it up. You don't exactly know what it is, So you're trying to figure out, when I say center, the problem comes. Remember the example I told you. Okay, 2 more minutes of digression. While I was talking about Saussure, I gave you that proper example. Saussure says the moment I say tree, you imagine tree, the image of a tree. But Derrida says substitutions take place. The moment I say mother, you think of different mothers, right? So the same happens here. When I try to simplify and when I try to use the term center, you are all trying to imagine centers that comes to your mind. Even when I cautioned you to not imagine the center of a circle, you may still be biased at thinking about that because I gave it as an example. I showed you a protractor. I drew a couple of tentative hypothetical circles. So maybe you confused it with the circular center. That center could be, let's say, the Prime Minister of India or the President of UNO or America, or let's say the principal of your school. Or at this particular point of time, I could be that center as a teacher, as an academic counselor lecturing 65 students of IGNOU, right? So I could also be the tentative center, probably. Okay. So I would request you to intervene whenever you find this confusing or wherever you need a little bit of an elaboration. I'll be happy to do that. Forget jitna khatam hota hai, utna hi khatam hona hai. Bas. Okay. So Derrida was influenced by the ideas of the philosophers Heidegger and Nietzsche. I've already told you that, who had questioned the validity of concepts such as truth, knowledge, and identity. And by the psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud, whose work challenged the notion of a fixed and absolute self. Those are the terms that we were discussing a little while earlier. Yeah, the concept of fixed and absolute self. So remember, when it comes to language, fixity is about meanings. When it comes to psychology, it's about the fixity of an individual's character attributes or traits. Right? You saw that video where they say it was monotonous because they were looking at IQ from a puzzled perspective. IQ or a person's character need not be a puzzle alone. A person may have different problem solving skills. Right? So that's something that Sigmund Freud focused on. So he challenged the notion of a fixed and absolute self. Also of importance to Derrida's work were the ideas of Saussure, who pioneered the investigation of language as a socially constructed phenomenon. In particular, distinction between langue and parole, which we have already discussed, and asserted that language as a system was based on the relationship between its elements. That words have no inherent or essential meaning, but derive meaning by their difference from one another. Developing these ideas, Derrida claimed that there is nothing outside the text or that there is no meaning outside of language itself. Once again, I pause. I try to underline, double underline, assert, reassert, and try to fix this in your head. Derrida postulates that there is nothing outside of the text. You get my point? You may scratch your heads and you may wonder, यही तो न्यू क्रिटिक्स ने कहा था, यही तो रोलांग बार्थ ने कहा था, right? बार्थ പറഞ്ഞതും ഇത് തന്നെയാണ്, ന്യൂ ക്രിറ്റിസിസം പറഞ്ഞതും ഇത് തന്നെയല്ലേ? You may wonder, but Derrida has an entirely different perspective on this. So Derrida says there is nothing outside the text, or there is no meaning outside of language itself. In terms of our connection, we speak about language as students of literature. So when it comes to language, there is no meaning outside the structure. You have a paragraph, the meaning underlies within that paragraph. The structure in itself has a sort of a coherence. Okay. He argued that logocentrism, or the way in which the word has been privileged throughout history as a perfect expression of thought, means that it is not possible to step outside language to uncover a real meaning. Ab samajh rahe ho? I'll give you another simple example. I'll give you a non-literary, absolutely absurd example. Don't write this for your exam, okay? This is just a referential example that I am bringing in for you to comprehend. Those who have watched the movie Mohabbatein, Shah Rukh Khan ka film, it was an average one. I hope if you remember that film, Okay, there is this institution run by Amitabh Bachchan, which is based on discipline. Actually, three principles: parampara, blah blah blah, dash dash dash, which I totally hate. I am not a disciplined fellow, nonetheless. But then there is this institution run by Amitabh Bachchan, which is all about discipline. We have quite a lot of those institutions around us, which makes us fit uniforms. Even in colleges, there are colleges where you have uniforms. You have to have a polished shoe. You have to wear a necktie. You have to speak in a particular chiseled language, right? So there is this institution run by Amitabh Bachchan. And the character played by Shah Rukh Khan has absolute disagreement with that system. It is an absolute disagreement with that system. He cannot comprehend or agree with that system. He believes in a much wider humanitarian approach to life. Just like what you see in Three Idiots, for example. Again, you can imagine Amir Khan as an example as well. Amir Khan versus Boman Irani, right? Boman Irani. So that can also be treated as a similar instance. So you have a system where you have to study by heart. And then comes Amir Khan and he says, what is a machine? He says, it can be anything as simple as a zip. Right? Up, down, it works. So that is a machine. Right? So this process in these two cases by Amir Khan or Shah Rukh Khan, they have a disagreement or a total animosity towards the structure that is there, right? So how do they, parampara, pratishtha and anushasana, okay, whatever crap. So how do they break this parampara, pratishtha and anushasana, which is part of the structure? That's a point that you have to be very careful about. If you have to break a structure, the reader asserts and reasserts and affirms and reaffirms that you cannot break the structure from outside. There is this popular saying that you may have heard, especially by the politicians, especially when it comes to campus politics. The campus politicians use this more often during their speeches. They say, an apolitical is a criminal. If you are saying you don't have a political bias, then you are being unjust to your society. Right? So people say, as an excuse, they say, I don't want to be a part of politics. Politics is like a, a slum, or politics is like a ganda, kanik in the English, kana, right? So politics is a manhole, for that sake, right? So I don't want to get into this shit. So these campus politicians would urge you to join politics by saying, you cannot correct the system without by being part of the system. So if you think something is not right, come join us, be a part of a campus politics, maybe contest in elections, become a leader and change the system. So this is exactly what the reader says. The reader says a structure is a self-contained, rigid or seemingly rigid, but fluxing proposition. So how do you thwart the structure? You can thwart the structure only from within. Only by being inside the structure, you can create that revolution. The classic example is the character played by Shah Rukh Khan in Mohabbatain or Amir Khan in Three Idiots. They are in the structure and they are breaking the structure. And of course, they are breaking away from the structure later as well. But then they are still trying to create a structure and create an alternate structure and work on it. We are not discussing that alternate structure for the time being. But our focus is how to be within the structure and how to get out of it. I've discussed my teachers to you before. I've used names like Dr. K. Ipapanikar, Dr. V.C. Harris, Dr. Rangarajan, Dr. Sherry Jacob, Dr. Madhukar Rao, and quite a lot of people. These people are all those offbeat people or those out-of-the-box thinkers. And when you acknowledge me as someone like that, that is because of what these people have said. That I had quite a lot of frustrations as a student when I went to my college as a degree student or postgraduate student. Even in my PG days, I had teachers who would come, simply read the text, say some random bakwas and leave. 90% of the classes that I was in, with all due respect to the people out there, I found that to be totally useless because they had nothing new to add to me. Whatever they said, I could go back to the text and still get it. What is my takeaway? So my takeaway is when professors like this come to me. Again, Dr. Verghese Abraham, who taught us literary criticism and theory. It is he who told us theory is not to be learnt by heart, but it is to be applied in your life. It doesn't mean you go back and speak jargon to people. You know how to speak to people. Right? In Malayalam, Dr. Verghese Abraham, who's still there, who's currently the principal of Bhavan's College, Kakanad in Kerala, in Cochin, Dr. Verghese Abraham used to say that even though you learn theory, even though you learn jargon, you know how to use your dialects and idiolects. You don't go home, sorry for the Malayalam, but this is for the Malayalis out there. You don't go home and say, Madashri or glass chudula dravagam tharu. You only say, Amma, chaya. Right? So we don't go home and say, Madaji, hame ye laiye. We rather say, Amma, chaya. Ya kapi, ya jo bhi hai. Okay? So, or we don't go to an auto driver and use a complex language, which is incomprehensible to him. So, to break the structure, we have to be part of the structure. We cannot say, मुझे ये पसंद नहीं है, so मैं इसके आसपास भी नहीं जाऊँगा. That's not how you break it. So, the reader lays his emphasis on this breaking the structure. मैं कहाँ था? So, he argued that logocentrism, or the way the word has been privileged throughout history as a perfect expression of thought, means that it is not possible to step outside language to uncover a real meaning. Therefore, there can be no single and fixed meaning in any text. Only multiple meanings brought about by the play of language can exist. Right, logocentrism speaks about fixity, center, single meanings. Remember, have you learned things by heart? Right? Photosynthesis is dash, 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 dash. A plus B the whole square is blah, 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 blah. There is no multiplicity there. I still look back and wonder what have those 80% of concepts that I have learned in my school has to do with my day-to-day life. Apart from the fact that, okay, I know leaves are green because of, yeah, that stuff. Okay, whatever it is. So, yeah, in Malayalam we say mitochondria. Okay, I shouldn't be abusing or using cuss words here. Okay, so nonetheless, so this is something that's really exciting. So what happens is Derrida says there is no single monotonous meaning that should be permitted within the structure. It is the multiplicity of meanings that has to be permitted within the structure. So when that happens, it is permitted by play. Play means interplay of words within the language. Meaning is endlessly deferred. D-E-F-E-R-R-E-D. I'm not sure how far you are familiar with this word. When I was an adolescent, when the television was taking, or digital media was taking a transformation, when the DTH was introduced into our world, what happened was there was the system where what existed initially was Doordarshan. There was DD1 and there was DD2. So we used to have an antenna. कभी कभी बारिश होता है या हवा आता है तो दूरदर्शन नहीं मिलता है. So we used to have a TV with 2 channels or maximum 1 channel. That 2 timings hota tha. So we used to watch Doordarshan. Then these direct-to-home television emerged, and a lot of competitors emerged. Quite a lot of channels emerged. And then we have this ESPN, Star Sports Network, and so on and so forth. So initially, aisa hota tha ki whenever there was a match of India, it was telecast live, especially cricket matches. Lekin when DTH arrived, it was written in Doordarshan, you are seeing a deferred telecast. So what is a deferred telecast? Generally, we have the word live, right? Live is what you are seeing. But even live is slightly deferred. If you go to a stadium and open a mobile app and watch the match live, and you are watching it in front of your eyes, you could see that the ball has already been bowled, but then maybe there's a 3 to 4 second delay in what you're witnessing. In Doordarshan, back then, because of this competition between Doordarshan and paid channels, the telecast used to be derailed by, let's say, 30 to 40 seconds. So if you are listening to a radio on parallel, then you could listen to them simultaneously. Radio, they would say Sachin has hit a 6, and then 30 seconds later you could see Sachin Tendulkar stepping out and hitting a 6. So this is something that happened. It is not delayed. You should not confuse it with delayed. Delay is a rather intermittent, long process. Derail is a slightly delayed process. Again, they are synonymical, but they are different. Delay means there ho gaya. Let me give you an example. We started at 5:45 p.m. today, right? Our class was delayed by good 15 old minutes. Derail is like, let's say there is a network issue from my side. So I say this at, let's say, 6:51 p.m. 10 seconds, and you are able to hear it only at, let's say, 6:51 p.m. 20 seconds. So that is called derail, slightly delayed for a certain period. So that's what happens according to Derrida when it comes to meaning. So meaning is endlessly deferred, present only in the form of a trace. That's another pedagogical term that he uses, TRACE. So present only in the form of a trace of all the possible absent meanings, and all language is metaphorical, referring to something which it is not. Again, a moment of pause, pay attention, listen to this carefully, and take it to your head. All meaning is present in the form of a trace of all the possible absent meanings. A mother is a mother because a mother is not a father. A mother is not a brother. A mother is not a sister. So, of all possible absent meanings, and all language is metaphorical, referring to something which it is not. Right? This is a book because this is not a ball. Or this is a mouse because this is not a computer. Or this is a plate because this is not a bowl. Or this is not maybe something else. So this referentiality of language is something that makes it in a flux, according to the reader. I hope this is making sense right now. Feel free to interrupt. I again repeatedly tell you this. Feel free to interrupt if I am confusing you at any point of time. Okay. The practice of deconstruction is therefore concerned with bringing to light some of the conflicting forces in the text and highlighting the devices it uses in order to claim legitimacy and true status for itself. We'll again come to that later. Many of which may lie beyond the intention of its author. Remember, intentional fallacy, author intentions irrelevant, taking it to a different dimension here. It also seeks to destabilize the hierarchy of significations derived from the binary oppositions. See, when you try to locate a text, when you try to deconstruct a text, the reader wants you from prioritizing hierarchy of binary oppositions. You know what binary oppositions are: good, bad, man, woman, black, white, right? So there is a hierarchy attached there. Why do we say man first and woman next? Right? Why do we say tall first and short next? So Derrida says we should get rid of such binary, or we should be wary of such binary oppositions. Okay. So he says it also seeks to destabilize the hierarchy of significations derived from the binary oppositions in language. Pairings such as speech and writing. You get me? Speech and writing. Again, let me introduce jargon to shift gears. Speech and writing, phonocentrism and logocentrism. अब समझ आ रहा है ना? Speech and writing, primacy of speech, primacy of writing. So phonocentrism, logocentrism, nature and culture, masculine and feminine, and so on, in which one word is defined as the norm from which the other deviates. समझ रहे हो ना? One word, the first word in particular, is defined hierarchically as the norm from which the other one deviates. Binary opposition happens as a part of a deviation by the latter from the former, which is considered to be unreliable or undesirable, which to the reader is a crime. Because that is how structure dominates. Again, let me give you an example. Tomorrow I'll be talking to you about feminism. So tomorrow आपको ये बहुत ज़्यादा समझ में आएगा. But for the time being, let me give you a glimpse. Right? As per a structure which craves for a center in a system, which is patriarchal. I hope you all understand the word patriarchal. So in a patriarchal structure or a system, what is the center that we are looking at? Even within the binary oppositions, who is at the center? It is the man. The man is placed at a patriarchal center, hypothetical center, and woman in that binary opposition is subjugated to man. So when you subjugate the positionality of the latter from the former in a binary opposition, if the flux has to happen, again I repeat the word flux, F-L-U-X, if the flux has to happen, the flux would be deemed in a structure of discipline, in a structure of rigidity, in a structure of hierarchy. That flux would be labeled, again I use a terminological term, the flux would be labeled L-A-B-E-L-L-E-D, labeled as deviant or defiant, right? Imagine yourselves back in your school questioning the teacher or questioning some act by your teacher. What all tags would you be given? Tandoni, Tonyasi, Temmadi, Talerchavan, Gurtiatavan, right? Gamand, Ziddi, Gussegar. What are all the tags that you get? Overconfident. And the end product is chup, bechup, chupoja, right? So that is what structure does to, all those stuff. So I'm sure you will be able to draw at least 50 words. We are all in the same boat. So the structure, which is rigid, which is hierarchical, which places the binary opposites in that sense, makes the deviant who promotes the flux, who promotes the transition, who promotes the change, who promotes the shift in the center, who desires for the shift in the hypothetical center, as defiant or deviant. Now look at the man-woman binary. So man is at the center of a patriarchal, well-ordered structure, system of a society. And any woman who wants to break free from that rigidity is considered to be deviant. And feminism actually emerged as a cuss word in a daily. I'll come to that later. In a newspaper, the word feminism was used as a cuss word, as a defiant group of women who have set apart to cause a revolution against men, a utopian revolution against men. So such a defiance is what creates the flux. I hope you're following me right now. I hope this is getting interesting. This is why I love teaching Derrida. It becomes really central to life. This becomes really interesting. Param keeps asking about the use of new criticism and even Roland Barthes. That's where Derrida becomes. That's why he's a cult figure. When I began, I spoke to you about him as an intellectual philosopher. I spoke about him as a cult figure. The reason is exactly this. Okay. We'll come to those things later. Let me just rush through because we still have quite a lot to deal with. Okay, so he speaks about how it seeks to destabilize the hierarchy of significations derived from the binary oppositions in language pairings, such as speech and writing, nature and culture, masculine and feminine, in which one word is defined as the norm from which the other deviates. Look at that word, deviates. A deconstructive close reading will not attempt to fix meaning, but merely to situate, S-I-T-U-A-T-E, situate texts in relation to one another and to locate the aporia. You have already seen that in the video. Locate aporia or impasse of meaning, the puzzle of meaning within them, or the complexity of meaning within them. That's again a key terminology that comes to Derrida. Aporia. So what is aporia? You are listening to the radiant terminology and you are confused. That in itself is an aporia. Right? The puzzlement that's created by this combination of words and creation of meaning. So he says that a deconstructive reading, just like what Barthes and new critics did, is not trying to fix anything. They are trying to situate certain things. Again, let's take the stereotypical case where there is a patriarchal system and man is at the center of it, and the women who are feminists are in a flux. So, a stereotypical criticism would be to identify these group of writers or activists as feminists. But a deconstructionist attempt at this phenomenon, I again use the word phenomenon, which is also central to Derrida. They look at that phenomenon and they try to locate the position of feminist women in that phenomenon. I hope you are able to understand this now. They are not trying to say Mary Wollstonecraft is a feminist, or Virginia Woolf is a feminist, or Simone de Beauvoir is a feminist. They are looking at where they are placed and why they are positioned in a certain way and how they are made to function within the flux. For example, when we come tomorrow and discuss Mary Wollstonecraft, for instance, Mary Wollstonecraft accuses women. She says that women are fragile and women are lazy and women are, not caring about their husbands. They just want to sit home, produce babies, and lavishly spend their husband's salary. You may find it really baffling in the 21st century. You could say, how then do you call Mary Wollstonecraft a feminist? So a deconstructionist would look at Mary Wollstonecraft according to her timings. We would locate her as someone who lived at a time when, forget equality, you couldn't even speak about voice for a woman. Or a deconstructionist would look at Virginia Woolf and say that she was a feminist because she belonged to a filthy rich family who were all literary figures, stalwarts, the popular Bloomsbury group, that is. So such a reading becomes deconstructionist. They try to situate what is in text rather than fix the text or fix the meaning. I hope you are able to understand. Situate, locate, place. Right? Where do you place a particular scenario? Where do you place a particular person? Right? It is the context that matters to a deconstructionist. Okay. This project gives rise to the concept of intertextuality, or the idea that texts are related to each other by their shared use of literary conventions and devices, by their participation in a tradition, and by their allusions to one another. The term is particularly associated, intertextuality that is, with the French structuralist critic Julia Kristeva, Roland Barthes, who termed texts which tend themselves as deconstructionist or structuralist reading lissable. You remember in our last class we spoke about readerly and writerly texts. So readerly is lissable. And he demonstrated this thesis by deconstructing the Balzac story Saracen. We discussed that in the last class in S bar Z. The opposite of these are scriptable, that is writable texts, or illisible, unreadable texts, which evade interpretation by refusing to conform to any literary conventions or standards. Other noted deconstructionist critics are Paul D. Mann, whose allegories of reading applied the techniques of deconstruction specifically to literary texts, J. Hillis Meller, Barbara Johnson, Jonathan Culler, Terry Eagleton, and M.H. Abrams. We've dealt with them briefly. Paul D. Mann I want to touch, but I'm not sure I'll be able to do that today. So sometime when we get some time, I'll do that. So I'll again come back to Derrida and his structure, sign, and play. But then let me take you through a few concepts of Derrida or key terms of Derrida. And if we have time, we'll come back to an elaborate discussion. Because I think it's 7:05 already. I already told you we won't have the Q&A today. Please remember, please note down your doubts, come back tomorrow and we'll discuss that tomorrow. For today, we have 20 minutes or 25 minutes more. So let me very quickly go through his terminology because that's something you would find it difficult. And then if we have time, we'll come back to further elaboration of these concepts that I've already spoken about. Okay. So Derrida speaks about duality as contradictorily coherent. We spoke about multiplicity of meanings. Derrida also speaks about duality as contradictorily coherent. Let's see what it is. So in that, the center is the governing element of the structure. In that, the center is the governing element of the structure. It is not open to substitution. If the center is rigid, it is not open to change. Take the case of a political system. Well, I'm not being politically critical, but I'm just drawing some natural observations. Don't get me wrong. Take the case of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, or take the current postulation of our present Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi. They want to continue in the throne that they are in. Even when there is a tentative consensus that one should rule not more than 2 tenures. They are into a third tenure. And had Nehru been alive, maybe he would have been into a 4th or 5th tenure as well. We can see quite a lot of such people in history. In a political science context, deconstruction becomes significant there. I hope this becomes better. The multiple layers are clearer to you right now. So in that, the center is the governing element of the structure. It is not open to substitution because it is rigid. It is not willing to change. Okay. So the center is the governing element of the structure. It is not open to substitution, and therefore is not part of the totality of the structure itself. Thus, the center is within the structure, in that the system would not exist without it, but it is also outside the structure because it cannot participate in the workings of the structure. It in fact limits such workings. This dual nature of the center is what Derrida calls contradictorily coherent. I hope it is clear to you. If it is not clear, please do let me know. The coherence of the center is not permitted by the rigidity of the structure, wherein it is not open to substitution. Derrida problematizes the concept of center. The concept of center is problematic to the structuralist view of language, in that the assumption that the center is the origin of all things within the system makes the center irreplaceable. I'll give you an example. Forget language. Let's take theology into consideration. Theology, something that's related to religion, right? So in religion, what is at the center?
The God and faith.
God and faith, true. So the moment you place God at the center of a system, it becomes rigid. What do you replace God with? Again, because you are all non-native speakers of English and because you're all Indians, let me also make it a little bit more clear, because otherwise you would argue with me. Derrida is speaking from a Western philosophical vantage point. Okay? Derrida is talking about a Western philosophical vantage point of view. Because otherwise we have a counter argument. What is a counter argument?
We have many gods.
Exactly. We have in India, as per him, I mean, I'm not generalizing Indian religion as Hindu religion, don't get me wrong. But in Hindu religion, which is practiced widely in India, we have multiple gods. And just in case you are bored, let me give you a religious bhashan for a couple of minutes. Just a popular story, which you may hear in temples, on the need to have faith. Well, I'm not trying to reaffirm faith in you or instill faith in you, but I'm just giving a hilariously funny story. Okay? The story is very simple. A man was in a lot of problems. He was literally frustrated with his life. He felt this life is meaningless. Chalo, chodo, mar lete hain. So he walks up a hill, a very steep top hill or a cliff, and he jumps from top of it to commit suicide. Samajh rahe ho na? He climbs up a hill, he jumps down to commit suicide. The moment he jumps, he realizes how steep he's going and how his body would break into pieces. And he starts calling God or gods. He says, "Hey Rama, mujhe bachao." Then he's going down and he calls God. Okay, the story is like this. He calls God for help, but then eventually he falls down, gets torn into pieces, he dies. Then he goes into heaven or hell or gate of the whatever it is. He goes there and he questions or abuses the authority over there. He says, all this is bakwas. You say you would save us. I'm a very staunch devotee. I called you for help, but then you didn't come to my rescue. He demanded a trial of gods because they didn't come to the rescue of a ardent bhakt. Then all the gods gave him their side and they presented themselves before him and said or justified or demanded or defended their case. You know what the defense was? Are beta, you jumped from the cliff. What did you do? You called, Rama, mujhe bachao. So Rama was about to start for your help. That within 2-3 seconds, you started shouting again, Ya Shiva, mujhe bachao. So Rama was like, ठीक है, Shiva जाके बचा लेगा. So Rama waited there. Rama didn't go. Shiva started. Okay, मेरा भक्त है, I'll save him. Shiva started. Then he was like, मुर्गा मुझे बचाओ. Then Shiva was like, okay, मुझे नहीं चाहिए, तुम्हें मेरा बच्चा चाहिए, चलो कोई बात नहीं. तो मुर्गा started. Then he was like, या हनुमान मुझे बचा लो. Right? And eventually he had to meet his decisive fate. So the moral of the story is have faith in something, and when you call somebody, don't call another person, have faith in that particular person. That's the moral of the story. Okay, the focus I'm trying to make here is अरे कहाँ से कहाँ भटक रहा हूँ मैं, कहाँ था मैं? Yeah, so the concept of center is problematic to the structural center of language in the assumption that the center is the origin of all things within the system, makes the center irreplaceable. Once you fix a center, in a structuralist perspective, the center is irreplaceable. Logocentrism becomes stronger there, giving the center what Derrida calls full presence or full power. Because the center cannot be replaced by other elements within the system, it also cannot be defined in relation to other things, which contradicts the Saussurean viewpoint that meaning is relational or contingent on surrounding elements, the arbitrariness. The thought that the center is a transcendental signified or the ultimate source of meaning breaks down the arbitrary nature of signifier and signified. The very nature of structure or system means that the system cannot be discussed without using the language or discourse of that system, and consequently, there are no systems without some kind of center. Abhayana or confusion. Derrida says there is, when I read the summary, Derrida says center is not there, center is a desire for the center is a hypothetical position, but then Derrida also says when one center is thwarted and replaced by another center as a result of this free play, again the centrality is relocated. जवाहरलाल नेहरू गए, कौन आया? लाल बहादुर शास्त्री आया, तो प्राइम मिनिस्टर था नेहरू लेकिन शास्त्री बना. बहुत साल बाद ये सब गए, मनमोहन सिंह आए, then मोदी आए. So the center, the ideology for that instance in a political vantage point, when Manmohan Singh was there for 10 years, the Congress ideology was running the nation. Manmohan Singh left, the center was destabilized, Narendra Modi came to power, the center was again re-established from a different perspective. Let's go back to the example that we were discussing a little while earlier. In a patriarchal structure, in a patriarchal system, a man at the center and women who are deviant, termed as feminists. Imagine a world where feminists replace a man-centric world. a male-centric world. Of course, quite a lot of changes are happening in today's world. In such a system, again, there is no absence of the center. That's why center becomes problematic. Even in such a thwarted system, at the center you have women, and at the flux you have men. Whenever you discuss caste system and reservation, you can observe the same problem. The people who belong to the privileged class or caste are often heard ruing that, we don't get equal opportunities. These people are given a free hit. But then at an initial point of time, or even today at various quarters, there is caste-based discrimination. So there are people who are at privileged positions because of their birth, that so-called noble birth or noble parentage, of which they have no control on. And because they are at that position, they control and they kind of abuse that power and privilege in order to cause misery to the people below. So when these people are at the center, let's say stereotypically speaking, the Brahmins are at the center of that power, or Kshatriyas are at the center of that system, then who are at the deviant structure? The Ambedkarites, the Dalits, the subaltern that Spivak speaks about are at the flux. So according to the Rita, the center becomes problem not only because Brahmins or Kshatriyas are at the center. It is equally problematic to the Rita. Of course, he doesn't speak about Indian aesthetics. This is my interpretation of the Indian aesthetics of Western philosophy. There it's class, race, white and black, all right? But here I'm putting examples that's comprehensible to you. So let's say if a Brahminical Kshatriyite system is thwarted or subverted by the Ambedkarites or the Dalits, replacing them at the center, right? Again, structurally or power-wise, they are at the center. And when, let's say, the marginalized are at the center, these people are at the deviant mode. I hope I'm making sense to you. Again, if you are concerned or confused, just go back to that poem by G.M. Hopkins, The Wind Hour, where he speaks about the gyre concept, G-Y-R-E. You could easily reconnect with the Derridean ethos. Of course, Derrida doesn't refer to Hopkins or that poem or the gyre system, but you could see quite a lot of resemblances here. Okay, so he says that's why the center is to be problematized. Again, what is bricolage? Bricolage is another key term to Derrida. So once a system is deconstructed, it can be thrown out as having no value, or it can be used under the view that it has flaws. FLAWS. Hena, when you destabilize a structure, spelling of bricolage. It's there in the chat box. Bricolage, it's there in the chat box. I've already given that name. Bricolage means tool at hands or means at hand, what you have with you. Okay, so once a system is deconstructed, it can be thrown out as having no value, or it can be used under the view that it has flaws. Right. Once you deconstruct and destabilize the center. Right. Again, let me give you this political example. This is again a personal opinion. Pardon me if I shouldn't make such opinions. But I keep telling this. There is a Lok Sabha election impending. A couple of years later, there is a Constituent Assembly elections impending in Kerala. I keep telling this. In 2014 and in 2019 in India, and in 2016 and 2021 in Kerala, what happened in India and Kerala is that Congress was outthrown from power. In 2014 and 16, outrightly thrown out of business. 19 and 21, again out of business. Replaced by BJP at the center and CPIM at the state. Of course, we can draw quite a lot of parallels and paradoxical opposites within the system. But then, in 2023, there would be quite a lot of majority, especially in Kerala. I don't know about the rest of the India, because they have a different religious ethos altogether. But at least in Kerala, there are quite a lot of people who are fed up by these two ruling majorities. But the question is, why should we go back to Congress? Is it because we don't have another alternative? Unfortunately, that is the case scenario. For the reasons that Congress was thrown out of power in 2014 and 16, and again in 2019 and 21, including nepotism, familial rule, corruption, support of family members to get into power, and a hell lot of other things, instability, political instability, and a lot of other things. Over a decade and two, perhaps, what has changed? So this is something that I'm taking back to Derrida's theory. So when he says once the system is deconstructed, it can be thrown out as having no value. Either you can say Congress or the INDIA Munnani. Yeah, we say that in Malayalam, right? In Malayalam, how do we say that? INDIA is one way of interpreting it, or maybe we can call it India and say this is what we need. Okay, that's a personal perception. Nonetheless, so either we can disregard it entirely and say it has no value. There is no point in reinstating these people again. Of course, we are suffering, but then these people are not going to take us anywhere again. They are not united in themselves for that sake. Or it can be used under the view that it has flaws. That's also something that most of us do these days. We look at these two and we decide that they have not changed, they have not gone much further, but the other people are worse. We accused Manmohan Singh of gas price hike or fuel price hike when the gas cylinder was 400 rupees. Today we are paying 1,200 and 1,700 for the commercial cylinder. So okay, let's bring them back. Maybe they'll give it to us for 900. So we established that decentered or destabilized system as we accept it with flaws and we give them that chance. So this is something Derrida speaks about, and he says that in the second option, where we recognize it as having flaws, inherent flaws, FLAWS for those who are looking at spelling. In the second option, the system is seen as being built around a central idea that is not an absolute truth but a construct, even an illusion, because we don't have a choice. It is not an absolute truth, as in the structuralists or the ones before that. We are not looking for a fixity, but we are looking at it from a convenient zone, an illusion. We believe, right? Left, right, left. Ye aayega, wo aayega, hum sudhar jayenge. Right? I mean, again, a political statement, but just for the sake of theory, locating theory for that sake, or situating theory for that sake. 2016 or 21, the motto was LDF varum, ellam sheriya. The motto that we speak about these days is LDF pogum, ennalengilum ella sheriyayilum sarilla, idilum bedayirikkum. Okay, just being sarcastic. Don't be angry towards me for expressing it explicitly. But then, yeah, so this is the concept of bricolage, or the use of a system to get a job done or a point across without worrying if the system is true. In Hindi, we say kaam chalane ke liye. We want to get something done. We know it is not perfect, लेकिन फिर भी अगर काम चलती है तो ठीक है. समझ रहे हो ना? There is a certificate we need to produce somewhere, and maybe we are not eligible for that, or the authority won't give us that certificate. फिर भी we know that the certificate is not going to be verified by anybody. Okay, so let's hoax it. Let's get a false signature and get the job done. So this is called bricolage, the means at hand. The second option is emphasized over the first when Claude Lévi-Strauss, the mythology critic, who uses this term for the first time as bricoleur, B-R-I-C-O-L-E-U-R, someone who uses the means at hand. That is, instruments he finds at his disposition around him, inherited concepts. By trial and error, the bricoleur adapts them, not hesitating to change them where necessary. Again, take the case of political elections. We try a party, we are not happy with it, we are happy to change it for convenience. So by trial and error, we are happy to adapt and change wherever it is necessary. For Derrida, there is a critique of language in the form of bricolage. Bricolage is critical language itself. Lévi-Strauss contracts the bricoleur with the engineer, who should be the one to construct the totality of his language, syntax, and lexicon. In this sense, the engineer is a myth. Bricolage is a mythopoetical intellectual activity, and it is here that we see its discourse on myth reflects on itself and criticizes itself, just like structuralism justifiably claims to be critique of empiricism. Tautolization, or totality of language, is defined as a useless and impossible movement of supplementarity. The sign replaces a center which supplements it, taking the center's place in its absence. The sign becomes the supplement. Again, see how far we have come from Saussure? The sign becomes the supplement. Okay, we only have 4 minutes, so I can't again go back to the complications of the theory. There was a little bit of an explanation that I wanted to do, which I won't do for the time being. But I'll give you one more example and I'll call it a day. This is very important, and that's why I've thrown the book away and I'm going back to that example. Okay, I'll also read that summary once again now, just in case now you would get it. Okay, so Derrida speaks about the absence of the center, which signifies the death of the author. It is only by destabilizing the text that you can interpret and deconstruct the text. An author-centric, biography-centric approach of a text would not let you situate the text or locate the text. I hope I'm clear with those terminologies, situate or locate the text or its meanings. The center is paradoxically within the structure and outside it. I think it was Param who had asked about Barth accusing the death of the author and nothing outside the text. So when it comes to post-structuralism and Derrida acknowledges this production that happens outside the text as well. And that is what we call intertextuality in this context. So Derrida says the center is paradoxically within the structure and outside it. You may look for meanings within the text, inside the text, and you may also draw meanings due to intertextuality. Again, take the case of trilogies. I am giving you one more logical example. Take the case of trilogy. Chinua Achebe has written 3 novels, companion novels. No Longer at Ease, Things Fall Apart, and Arrow of God. So how do you read one text after the other? Without a continuum of the first, you can't read it. So for Barth, no, you read Things Fall Apart as it is. But then for Derrida, meaning exists within No Longer at Ease, but then meaning also exists outside it in Things Fall Apart and Arrow of God. I hope I'm clear to you. Or to give a Malayalam example, Sethuramayar CBI 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. According to Roland Barthes, Sethuramayar CBI Part 1 exists on its own. Part 2 exists on its own. But Derrida says it could exist on its own, but it can also be intertextual. Okay. So the center is paradoxically within the structure and outside it. The center is at the center of the totality, and yet the center does not belong to the totality, is not part of the totality, because it is in a flux. The totality has its center elsewhere. Center is not the center. It keeps changing, right? So center is the desire for the center. The center is created, and it is to be destabilized or deconstructed. Otherwise, we conceptualize the center as origin or end, arche or telos. And we engage in archaeology, where the origin may always be reawakened. Right? The moment we speak about beginnings, we are reawakening and reasserting. Remember the God who took the cross, the path of the cross for you. Right? Remember the God who sacrificed his life for you. So we are reawakening, we are reasserting that the moment you are engaging in archaeology. Right? We engage in eschatology, where the end may be anticipated. Right? We anticipate the, so we engage in eschatology, ESCHATALOGY. Why? Where the end may be anticipated. Right? तो ऐसा करेंगे तो उसमें आके आएगा, you बर्बाद हो जाएगा. Right? So eschatology. So one last example, and I'm calling it, we are already out of time, so I'm just giving one example and I'm calling it a day. This is very significant, and that's why I'm giving an intertextual example. I spoke to you about center as a rigid hierarchical structural vantage point. The periphery is in a flux. So what Derrida and the post-deconstructionists, including Gayatri Spivak, because her work, Can the Subaltern Speak, is actually based on this. Can the Dalits, can the subaltern speak? Because she says, within the system that is a circle, you have at its center the caste hierarchical person, let's say Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and so on. Even Shudras are within the structure. So what happens within the structure is there is a flux. Like, again, I can't draw in the screen, but then let's say there is a center. So there's a circle and there's a center. From the center, you can draw a downward arrow, and from the periphery, you can draw an upward arrow. Irrespective of the pace, there is this flux, mobility. From the periphery, people are they're craving for that center, and they're trying to move upward. And people who are at the center are thwarted, are upset, are pulled down, and they are in the downward flux. Spivak questions, so what happens to those who are at the periphery, at the axis? Remember a wheel for that sake. What happens if you are at the periphery of the wheel? You will be thrown off the wheel, right? So the subalterns, they become voiceless. They are rendered voiceless. They are thrown off the axis. They can't participate in this upward mobility race. I hope you get this. This is very central to a political attempt of deconstruction, which is made literary in a cultural scenario by Spivak. So where are the subalterns? They are thrown out of the axis. They can't participate in this upward mobility and destabilize the structure and the system. I hope that's clear. So on that note, I remain for today. Tomorrow we'll come back and we'll discuss feminism. And while we have the Q&A, I'll definitely take questions from this as well. And Param, the reason why I looked for you today when we began is I wanted to give an example of an attempt at new criticism. So I'll come back to this book tomorrow, just in case I forget, remind me. And
thank you very much.
I'll give you some interesting observations tomorrow. All right. So just in case you are confused, go back to your blogs, try reading this, and then come back and post a question to me. I honestly hope I didn't bore you too much. I hope I tried to make as simple as possible these concepts, and I hope you are aware of what it is, at least at a peripheral level. And that would maybe encourage you to read more and understand and appreciate Derrida more. And before winding up, I have a couple of links for you. If at all you don't go through Derrida in a total sense, go and read these two articles at least. One is What is Ideology? And the book that is given there, Spectres of the Marx. Try getting it and read it if possible. Also, I have a summed up video of the Derridian concept. Of course, I have elaborated on that, but then I have a small one. Again, you can go back to that Yale University lecture, one that I had shared in my initial classes, where Professor discusses Derrida in an extensive manner. All right. No time for questions today. I'm really sorry. I have to rush. So I'll take your questions tomorrow. Please feel free to come back and ask questions. We are almost 5 minutes after our time. So thank you so much for your patient listening.